Hello, and welcome back to the Philippocrites. I'm using a new camera today. I don't know if you can tell. I put on a filter as well because I thought it makes it look a bit more natural, but now I see it looks a bit dark. It's a nostalgia filter. I'll plug it in as well. Not me. So, today we're beginning with chapter 10 of Genesis, and when we finish that, yeah, that's fine. I'll see if I can color correct it later. It does look a bit strange, but anyway, the filter. So, chapter 10, Genesis chapter 10. We've almost finished the first fifth of the Bible, which is really cool. I mean, of Genesis, not the Bible. The first fifth of the book of Genesis. It's got 50 chapters in it, so chapter 10 is a pretty big landmark, and once we finish this, then we come to really one of the most impactful chapters that I've ever read, which is chapter 11. But let's begin and then see what this is all about. My Bible. There it is, in the far corner. You see it? Here it is. Oh, wow, you can even beat this chair momentarily. Haven't seen that before, have you? Well, you have actually, I guess. But anyway, so let's start. Verse 10. Ve'ele toldoth b'nei Noach, Shem, Ham, ve'Yafeth. Ve'yivaldu lahem banim achar ha-mabul. So, translate that quick. It's a good intro to what this chapter is all about. Here we go. Chapter 10, verse 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And to them were sons born after the flood. So this chapter will be about the sons of Noah and Noah's sons, which were born to them after the flood. So, got a time allocation here, after the flood. Antediluvian is before the flood, so post-diluvian, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, the word Toldoth comes up here again, Toldah being the generation. Noah was the most righteous in his Toldah, in his generation. So, yeah, that's that. So let's have a look at verses 2 to 5. So verses 2 to 5, I'm just going to read them in one go. Bnei Yafeth, Gomer, u Magog, u Madai, the Yavin, the Teval, u Meshech, the Tiras. Verse 3. U Bnei Gomer, Ashkenaz, the Rifath, the Thogarma. And then verse 4. Uvene Yavin, Elisha, the Tharshish, Ketim, the Dodanim. And then verse 5, to close off this part. Me ele nifredu iye ha goyim be'artsotham ish lilshono le mishpechotham be'goyehim. So there's a couple of important names that are coming up now. Frame rate is quite low, it seems like, but we'll work with that. So a couple of new names coming up here, and a couple of interesting expositions. Firstly, well, Tiras and Meshach. So these are the sons of Japheth, of the firstborn. And of him are said to descend all of the Caucasian peoples, so the Europeans specifically. And there are people, like I did say in one of the previous videos, that claim that they are direct descendants of Yafet that still live in Armenia, in a place where I think from that place you can see the mountain which is claimed to be Mount Ararat, where the ark came to rest, Ararat. So that's quite interesting, and these would be then their forefathers if they're true, if they're right about their heritage. So I found that quite interesting. Anyway, so the sons of Yafet, and they're called Gomer and Magog. Magog is an important name throughout the Old Testament because it becomes associated with potentially the Scythians or some kind of one of those Eurasian steppe peoples that raid and pillage and so on and become very dangerous and do a lot of damage. And Gomer, I'm not sure exactly, but these are already names of nations that then come up in the prophets and so on. Perhaps these names also reused later by later characters in the Bible. It's also the name of the wife of Hosea, which was that's where I know the name from more clearly, I think. Hosea being the prophet who is told by God to marry a prostitute to represent how Israel has basically committed idolatry by using the imagery and language of adultery through the prophet Hosea, so that Israel becomes aware of its idolatry and its adultery against God. So Gamar, which is the verb from which this name comes, means to come to an end or to complete, which is interesting as well. To complete. So this son's name is Gomer, which means something like the completer, the one who brings things to an end, which is an interesting name. And then Magog is the second son, and Madai is another son. Let's have a look at Magog, because Magog comes up a lot. Like in the Old Testament, there are only 4 occurrences, which is important to note. There's one occurrence here in Genesis, then there's another occurrence in Chronicles. And this name does have some sort of symbolic significance. So I do want to look at these. Let's have a look at Chronicles 1 verse 5. I think that's just the same family tree that's being re-recorded in Chronicles, because that goes through all of the family trees again to re-establish the roots of Israel as they return to the promised land. I think Chronicles was written after the return from exile. From that perspective, as one sees from the end of Chronicles, 2nd Chronicles, where Cyrus the Great gives the commission that the temple in Jerusalem should be rebuilt and the Jews can return to their home. So that's quite interesting. And here the family tree of Yafet is just recounted, so we'll come across it again when we get there. That's in Chronicles. But then it comes up in Ezekiel, twice in Ezekiel, and those are the only other 2 places in the Old Testament. I'm not sure if it comes up again in the New Testament, in the book of Revelations or something like that. But I guess we will find out. Sorry, I'm just looking for Ezekiel, which comes after Lamentations, not before, naturally. Ezekiel 38 verse 2, here it says, well, so it's the beginning of a chapter and it's titled in the King James Bible, The Destruction of Gog. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, verse 2, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And say thus, saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So that's interesting. Meshech. Well, Daniel has a friend called Meshech. But these names, obviously, they mean a lot. And this is a people, like I did say, that is considered to be northward of these sort of big rocky mountainous country north of Mesopotamia. So it's quite interesting that one can place these peoples and that they are also mentioned furthermore in the Bible, even though they're not central to the plot. Ooh, this is quite intense. So this is a punishment that was used by Assyria, apparently, and that's what God says He will use against Magog, which is, "And I will turn thee back, and put hooks in thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer, which is the brother of Magog we just heard, and all his bands, the house of Togarma of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Be thou prepared, and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and thou a guard unto them." So, well, it carries on, but the point is just that here in Ezekiel, these northern tribes of humanity are brought back into the picture of it, which is very interesting to me. And they come up again in Ezekiel 39, verse 6. So just a chapter later, where it continues in the same vein. This is all about Gog being destroyed. But Magog specifically is then mentioned again in verse 6 of chapter 39, and it says, "And I will send a fire on Magog, and among them that dwell carelessly in the isles," which is like in the direction of Spain, is what I think a professor in the University of Pretoria once told us. Or it might have been in Germany already, I'm not sure anymore. "And they shall know," so it's in that direction, so it's out towards, maybe it's more towards like Crete and so on, the Greek Isles, or Sicily, the Italian Isles kind of, but it's in that direction out into the Mediterranean Sea, which is a big sort of threatening entity towards the Hebrew mind, I think. Which is why people like the Phoenicians and the Philistines and so on, seafaring people, are considered, well, I don't know if they're considered unclean because of that. They're considered unclean because they're not a part of Israel, but but they're considered strange for faring on the sea and so on. Yes, so, sorry, what was that? Verse 6, it says, "And I will send a fire on Magog, and among them that dwell carelessly in the isles, and they shall know that I am the Lord." Which is interesting. Does one want to interpret that in the direction of Pentecost? A fire that is sent? And then recognition of the Lord taking place? Anyway, that would be nice. This is taking a lot longer than I expected. But these names, they build a foundation for a lot of what comes later. So do pardon me, please. Anyway, so these names, but I think the importance of these names is that they get used later on to describe the northern tribes, and Magog is one of the important ones there. Then Yavin also comes, and Tubal, so Tubal is also mentioned in Ezekiel. We also had Tubal Cain earlier, so that's interesting. And then Meshech is here as well, he's also mentioned there, and Tiras probably also gets mentioned. So that's just important to remember, I think, that the children of Japhet are taken up there as the originators of those tribes in the north, in Armenia and so on. Armenia also being an important place for church history, as they're one of the oldest Christian churches later on, which I quite like. I find that cool. I don't quite understand their theology though, but I think they're also often lumped into that more Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox tradition of things. Anyway, so yes, the sons of Gomer. Gomer is mentioned. Ashkenaz is the Jews that were dispersed over the earth after the final destruction of Jerusalem, which now has been rebuilt, obviously. but there's a grouping of Jewish believers now, of Orthodox Jews. I think they are in Europe, so like the Western kind of European Jews. Although they might also be in Poland. Here's a map. Maybe I can put that up on the UI thing. But basically there are different groupings of of Orthodox Jews, and the one grouping calls itself the Ashkenazi Jews. And I know in Leipzig that is, I think, the grouping that is predominant. That is sort of Ashkenaz territory. And it's interesting. They call themselves that most likely because they're in the territory of the tribe of Ashkenaz. according to some tradition. And Ashkenaz is the son of Yafet. So they're in Yafet's territory, basically. And they've taken on that name to describe themselves geographically, I guess. Imagine. So Ashkenaz. It's of uncertain derivation. He's a son, of Gomer, and kind of, also gives us geographical reference to Europe. Ashkenaz. That was the one that I specifically wanted to look at here. Rifat Togarma. Interesting. Then Yavin, it's a cool name. The sons of Yavin. He was the other brother of Magog and background noise. And he has a son called Elisha, which is a name that we come across again later, which is cool. Elisha in English. Elisha, that's from Diablo, isn't it? Right, from Yavin is from the same word as Yona, the dove, I think. Yavin, Yona, the dove. So that's quite interesting. He's also called the dove, but a different form of it, Yavin. It's probably archaic because it's got that vav in it. Archaic form of Yona. So Dodanim, Kittim, these are Tarshish. So these then also become people groups. Tarshish being like a city-state. That is often associated with the Isles. So it would be interesting to see if in Ezekiel, maybe we can find it here, if Ezekiel associates the Isles with Tarshish, which is where Jonah also wants to flee to. Yeah, Jonah 1 verse 3, it occurs. I do want to see if it comes up in Ezekiel. Yes, it does. Okay. Yep. Okay, so it's even in the same place. The merchants and the ships of Tarshish, which was translated, I think, in the King James version of the islands. So anyway, that's that. They're out there in maybe they're Greek, maybe they're Italian or Tuscan, whatever Etruscan, whatever those older tribes of Italy are called. And so they're out there. They're also named here, and this name then becomes representative of faraway places in which Yafet's children settled. Then the Kittim are also, and the Dodanim, I can't think of them being mentioned anywhere, but I feel like the Kittim I've heard of a lot. And they come up in Isaiah. Maybe that's where I remember it from, and Ezekiel again as well. So, and in Daniel, ships come from Kittim. So that is quite interesting. Phoenicians. Okay, from Cyprus. There we go. So these guys are identified more closely with Cyprus. That's quite cool. Doranim, son of Yavin. See also Rodanim. That sounds interesting. I guess that could have been a writing mistake to make a resh of a dag. What's it called? I've forgotten what the D is called. Dag? No. Anyway. Oh, there's a mosquito. But it's gone. Okay, so again, it's always these family tree episodes that have mosquito because they're about blood and lineage. No, not really. Well, maybe, who knows? I don't. So, Doranim. Dalet, that's what it's called. The D. We are the Daleks. Almost a Dalet is not quite a Dalek, but anyway. So the Doranim, that was verse 4. And then verse 5 is from these me'ele, so from these were separated, and that's an interesting word. The maritime peoples. Oh, okay, so there we've had those already with the Kittim and Tarshish and so on. Goyim appearing here for the first time, I think. You can double check that as well. Goyim is a very important term in the Old Testament to describe everyone that isn't Israel, basically, or that isn't God's chosen people. The heathen, the pagans, the other people. It's kind of a racist term. Yeah. It says those other people, basically. Not very PC now, is it? Not that well, anyway, but it's true. I guess that's the problem. That's what makes us uncomfortable. Truth will set you free. Question is, would you rather be enslaved? Important question. Right. See, I'm using a new phone, but I haven't transferred everything yet. That's why I've got a new camera. Anyway, so let's see. The Goyim, unto their lands, they were divided. The maritime people. So Japheth's descendants are maritime people. I guess it kind of makes sense of the Vikings as well. They're also maritime people, and maybe they already started with the early Germanic stuff already back then. I know the kind of Goths settled around the Black Sea, I think, and the Caspian Sea probably, but I think more around the Black Sea. So they had a big body of water there. I don't know how far north they went to, like what's the northern sea called again? I've forgotten. In German it's called die Nordsee, I think, but it's got a different name. The Baltic? No, the Baltic Sea is... Yeah, near those eastern countries. So I don't... what is it? No, I think it is the Baltic Sea. Let me have a look. Baltic Sea. Yes, yeah, there we go. The Baltic Sea, that's the one I'm talking about. Yeah, so that's what I meant. I know what I'm talking about. Goy. Same as Gav. You see here we've got the Gav is archaic, I think. Means the back. And the Goy is derived from that. Yeah, E is the coast or region, I guess island also. That's very interesting. E. It's very similar to my mind. It's very similar to Germanic words for island as well, like Öy and all of this, if I remember correctly. Farad to divide. Yeah, okay. Farad. Let's see if I can remember that one. To divide. Okay, and a bit of discrimination going on here, which is necessary, so that we can recognize differences and similarities and truth, which has something to do with discernment, at least biblically. So ish lil shono, each according to his language. Now I think this is referring already to the time after Babel, in which language literally breaks. But it says basically these tribes were established after the Tower of Babel. And they sort of separated themselves according to their speech, which we also have recounted in Genesis 11. And each according to their mishpacha, which we had. The families, each according to their families and to their nations. The Goyim, again, the Goyim, the nations, the peoples, the others, the outsiders, outlander. Any reference today, any reference. So anyway, let's see if I can do all of the sons of Ham and all of the things they did. Okay. Uvnei Ham, Cush, U Mitzrayim, U Phut, U Canaan. Those are the first sons of Ham. Uvnei Cush, so all of the sons of Cush, or Cush in this case. Sava, Va Chavila, Va Savta, Va Rama, Va Savtecha, Uvnei Rama, Shava, U Dedan. Interesting name. Then let's see. It speaks a bit more about Cush in verse 8. Cush or Cush Yalad eth Nimrod hu hechel lioth go gibor, excuse me, ba'aretz. And now it speaks a bit more about Nimrod. Maybe you already guess what's going on here. In verse 9, Hu haya gibor tzayir lifne Adonai al ken ye amar Nimrod gibor tzayid, I think I said something else, tzayid earlier. Lifne Adonai. And so Nimrod carries on doing something, so I'm going to read that as well, and then obviously translate it. Vatahi reshith mamlachto Bavel. You can hear the word Babel. Bavel. The Eretz, the Akkad. Akkad is also familiar. I think that's Akkad anyway. The Chalne, the Eretz Shinar. So that's the land of Shinar and so on. And then in verse 11, Min haaretz ha-hi yatsa Ashur, also a familiar place, Ashur, Assyria, which begins as a city-state. And then also Yavin eth Nineveh, that becomes the capital of Ashur, so that's of Assyria. So that's also very interesting. Ve'eth Rehovoth Ir Ve'eth Kalach Ve'eth Resen ben Nineveh Uven Kalach Hi Ha'ir Ha-Gedolah, which we also hear in Jonah, I think. Okay, so that's Nimrod. We can look at Mitzrayim after that. But let's look at what Nimrod did. I think that's important. So from Genesis 10 verse 6 onwards, and the sons of Ham were Cush and Mitzrayim and Phut and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah and Sabta and Ra'amah and Sabtecha. And the sons of Ramah, Sheba and Dedan. Sheba being important. I think that's in the direction of the Ethiopian queen or something like that. I think she's called Sheba. Queen of Sheba is the one who appears to Solomon and tests his wisdom and then is surprised, astounded by his wisdom and marries him, I think, amongst many other women. And then in verse 8, Cush begat Nimrod. So Nimrod is an important character, and we see that now. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. Gibor. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So there's obviously an idiom that was used back in ancient days, which is pretty cool. We have that preserved. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad. These are all ancient the most ancient civilizations that we have records of, so that I like that. That's cool. We've got that in the account here as well. And Calne, in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Ashur, which is Assyria, and builded Nineveh. So Ashur is a character here who goes out and builds Nineveh. And the city-state, I think, of Ashur, of Assyria, is named after their main god. So to me it seems like the Bible is saying, well, Ashur was just a son of Ham, a descendant of Ham, a descendant of Ham, and he was just a man who built Nineveh, but because of how animism tends to be the fundamental religion that the human heart invents, Ashur was turned into a god in the minds of his descendants and was worshipped as a god in his cities that he founded, Nineveh being the capital then later on the Assyrian Empire. So I guess Ashur as a city of its own, and Nineveh. He also founded the city-state of Rehoboth and Kala, so he built quite a lot of cities. Must have been quite a powerful guy. And Rezen, between Nineveh and Kala, the same as a great city. So Rezen is a great city. I thought in the Hebrew that Nineveh and that all of them were being called a great city, but I think in this case it is pointing towards Rezen. Nineveh and Jonah is described as a city that takes 3 days to walk through, so that's quite interesting, I thought. Yeah. So that's Nimrod. He builds Babel, and that account of Nimrod building Babel is more, I think, explicitly described in Genesis 11, if one wants to harmonize it all. Nimrod and his descendants then probably. Which does make it seem like people were already sort of moving across the earth, but maybe the whole breaking of language happened in a unique way when God came down to look at Babel that caused that to speed up, to really take root, as is described with the sons of Yafet and their being separated and going into becoming the maritime peoples, the Ayiv, or however it was. So that was Nimrod, the son of Cush, and Cush is the son of Ham. He's the I wonder if Canaan is the firstborn son. Excuse me, I should put this on silent. But Canaan is certainly the son that takes the punishment of Ham, which is interesting. Maybe he's the youngest. He's named last here in the list. And in a sense that's reminiscent of Christ, who's also the youngest son of man. Interesting, to me, anyway. I don't know if we want to look more at... I don't think we need to look more at these other names. For our purposes here, we could dive very deeply into it. It would be good to remember these names if we come across them. Havilah we've had, that was interesting. Havilah is where one of the 4 rivers that are described in Genesis 2, the land which this river flows through, which is full of the zahav, the gold, and the onyx stone. I can't remember what kind of Yavin that is. It's some kind of Yavin, some kind of stone. That was, I think, in the land of Havilah. And so Havilah is defined here. This is that land. And I guess for those after the flood who are pointing back when they were recounting the stories of Genesis 1 and 2, they would say, there where Havilah is now, that's where that river flowed through, according to what our fathers told us. So that's how they were passing on this tradition, obviously guided by the Holy Spirit, so that we have it even today, because the word of the Lord is forever. And Ra'ama, I think we'll come across all of these countries again. Yes. But for now, I think that's fine. We could still look at Mitzrayim. Nimrod, the mighty hunter. This word hunter to me is interesting. Tsayir. Tsayid. I always want to say Tsayir. See, there's the confusion between the Resh and the Dalet. Excuse me. Dab. Anyway. That's just how I say damn with a cold. I don't have a cold. Just got a bit of a sneeze. That's what they always say, isn't it? But anyway, yeah, Gibor is mighty. It's one of these, the Giver, we had them, the Giverim was translated with Gigantes in the Septuagint. So Nimrod, maybe he was a giant, but he was a mighty hunter before the face of the Lord. And as a result, we've got that nice little proverb of this is a mighty hunter. Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, or something. Yes, Akkad, the Akkadians, we know of them. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on here. A lot of like really early civilizations being formed quite relatively soon after the flood. I guess God has already shortened the lifespan of humanity, and we're not getting the years, the ages to which people came anymore, which I think makes those that come earlier on in Genesis, very significant. So they're earlier on in Genesis where the names are where ages are ascribed to each of the people that sort of further the lineage that's important, that leads to Noah. Each character, even Noah in the end, is still given his age, but here we don't get the age of people, we just get their names. And I think that's because God says, well, they'll not get older than 120 anymore. My spirit will not strive with them anymore. So that's quite interesting. That is reflected here in this book of the generations. Yeah, the great city. And then we come to verse 13. I think we can still do that. Have a look at Mitzrayim. In verse 13. U Mitzrayim Yalad eth Ludim Ve eth Anamim Ve eth Lechavim Ve eth Naftuchim. Then at verse 14, Ve'eth Pathrusim Ve'eth Kasluchim Asher Yatzu Misham Pelishtim. So there's the Philistines coming up, Pelishtim. Yeah, so from them come the Philistines apparently, but anyway, we'll get into that with the translation. Then Ve'eth Kaftorim, and yeah, that was Mitzrayim. Let's have a look at Mitzrayim, because after that comes Canaan, and he's a bit on his own. Sorry, I'll wipe my nose a bit after that sneezing situation, excuse me please for that. Yeah, so from verse 13 we have, and Mitzrayim, important character, because Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. So every time we go to the country of Egypt, we have the word Mitzrayim coming up. So his descendants, Mitzrayim's descendants, are the Egyptians. And yeah, it's also interesting in this Josef von seiner Brüder by Thomas Mann. Joseph is described as disagreeing with the religious practices of Mitzrayim and his descendants, so there it's kind of still referred to. He's referred to as this person who instituted the religious practices of the Egyptians, and one can maybe see that reflected to some degree in his descendants, which are the Ludim. So we've got the Ludim, who are a people group, the Anamim. We've got the Lehavim and the Naftuhim, sorry. And then the Pathrusim, the Kasluhim. Out of whom came the Philistines, the Philistim, and the Kaftorim. And yeah, and that's where we got to verse 14. So there's only 2 verses here, but yeah, Mitzrayim is Egypt then, as was said, so we can follow what he is up to. Mitzrayim is the guy who founds Egypt, so he's there in northern Africa and against the Mediterranean, across the Nile. And Yalad, he begat the Ludim. I don't know if it's worth looking into these names more. I'm sure they come up again. The Anamim, so the Ludim tribe from Mitzrayim, yes, same as Lud. So Lud is a country, but he's also a son of Shem. That's very interesting. So there are 2 tribes of Lud. Okay, that makes it confusing, but that's fine. Yeah, so yeah, Egg. I don't know where Egg is. That's where. So Anamim is a tribe that descends from Mitzrayim, probably located in or near Egg, but I don't know where Egg is. Sounds interesting. And then the Naftuhim and the Lehavim. They only come up again in Chronicles, so I guess they aren't necessary to follow, or they're not as important to follow. And there are other people groups and so on. But I think, yeah, let's go on to Canaan then, because he is quite an important figure in the history of the Bible. Yeah, so let's have a look. It says, Uchenaan yalad eth Sidon bekoro ve'eth Cheth. Cheth, the word we've had before, and I'll remember what that is in a moment. Ve'eth Haivusi. This is in verse 60 now. Ve'eth Haivusi. Ve'eth Ha'emori. Ve'eth Ha'gir Gashi. And then verse 17. Ve'eth Ha'chivi. Ve'eth Ha'arki. Ve'eth Ha'sini. Interesting. And in verse 18, Ve'eth Ha'arfadi, Ve'eth Ha'tzemari, Ve'eth Ha'chamati, Ve'achar Nafotzu Mishpechoth Ha'kenaani. I'm going to go all the way to verse 9. Well, I'm going to read verse 19 as well still. Vayehi gevul ha-kenaani mitzidon bo'acha gerara ad aza bo'acha Sodoma va Amora va Adma Utz Voyim ad Lasha. Okay, and I'm going to add verse 20, sorry, because that's then the end of this chapter, according to the Masoretic text here. Elev Necham le Mishpechatam le Lil Shon Notham Be Artsotham Be Goyechem. So same differentiation of these people now. And that's the end of that, I think. Next time we can do Shem then, but let's look at the translation quickly from verse 15. So Genesis 10 verse 15 says the following: And Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Arkite, and the Sinite. I wonder if that's from Sinai. And the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. So from Ham, the Hamathite. And afterwards were the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as thou comest to Gerar, and to Gaza, as thou goest into Sodom and Gomorrah, and Admah and Zeboim, even unto Lasha. So Sodom and Gomorrah are mentioned here. And that Gaza would be south of Israel. That's kind of the border. So everything from there going into Africa is basically Ham or Canaan's country, it seems like. These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, and their countries, and their nations. So that's interesting. I don't think we need to go too much deeper into that. It would be interesting to look at it a bit more geographically. But yeah, I think that's where we'll leave it for today. And then we get to Shem, whose name means name. And that's also an important keyword in the Tower of Babel story, the Shem, that we either want to make for ourselves, or that is given to us the name above all names, the name of Jesus Christ, which the naming of which, all knees shall bend, and all tongues shall confess Christ is Lord. Maranatha.